Good afternoon. As members of an urban community and in a developed country, we don't really think about our basic needs. We don't really think about how, with the water we drink or the air we breathe in, we don't think about how some communities don't have that necessarily that privilege of having these basic needs being met in a healthy way. I'm going to talk to you about environmental injustice and air pollution in Houston. Before I begin, I just want to mention what environmental injustice is. Environmental injustice is the belief that some vulnerable communities are being most affected by the environmental problems that we see in today more than others. And sadly, why is it important? Because this is not a faraway reality. This is happening in our own community, in our own state, and in our own city, where minority groups in the Houston area are suffering the effects of air and water pollution in their day-to-day lives. So this led me to my research question, which is what are the health consequences related to the benzene emissions in the Houston Ship Channel due to environmental injustice? For those who don't know, the Ship Channel is all of these yellow area, and it goes from Houston, downtown Houston, all the way to Galveston, the Galveston area. However, I'm just going to focus on that area specified as with the red circle that includes Galena Park, Harrisburg, and Manchester. It is between 610, Highway 8, I-10, and 225 for references. Okay. So a little, my methodology for this research really goes in hand with the overview of this presentation. So first I'm going to start talking about the benzene exposure and what are the risks related to these, and also some of the basic properties of benzene that are related to these risks. The information that I gathered for this comes from the Center for Disease Control as well as the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency. Then I'm going to talk about the Houston case specifically, and how the benzene emissions in the Houston area are affecting its people. And most of the information that I gathered for this part, I gathered from the BTEX field study, where they analyzed Galena Park, Harrisburg, and Manchester. And I'm going to go in further depth further. And then I'm going to make this social connection, looking at the environmental injustice part. And I'm going to look at aspects such as socioeconomic aspects, and as well as racial aspects. And most of the information that I got for this part, I got it from the Texas Environmental Justice Advocacy Services, TEJAS in other words. Okay, so benzene emissions. Benzene comes from point sources and non-point sources. And for those who don't know the differences, point sources are the ones that are being emitted in a very dangerous way and a direct way. So one of the biggest point source emissions for benzene includes oil refinery industries. And the reason why benzene is so dangerous is because, according to the CDC, it is heavier than air, and so it allows it to expand in low areas, and where people are in close proximity to these emissions and in confined spaces, they are being exposed to high levels of benzene from these emissions. So according to the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency, some of the risks involved with benzene emissions include neurological symptoms, disorders in the blood and bone marrow, chromosomal aberrations, as well as damage in the immune system. On a study from 2015, Jakovich also found that exposure to benzene can lead to the development of leukemia. And he said that that's especially for children, which are the population group that are most vulnerable to these risks. And then in 2005, there was an experiment by Tamka and Jacob where they analyzed oil refinery workers who are constantly being exposed to these emissions of benzene. They analyzed them for a period of 30 days, and they found that with this exposure to benzene, they developed joint, rheumatic, gastric, and even dental problems. And they also found in some of them kidney and liver dysfunctions. And after looking at all of these results, they came to a conclusion that what people really need, considering that even the minimum exposure to benzene can have detrimental consequences, what people need is to have zero tolerance regulations. Unfortunately, that is not the case for every city in this country or in the world. So, now going to the Houston case. Like I said, benzene can be emitted from different sources, but around 99% of benzene emissions in the Houston area comes from point source emissions. And so point source emissions, like I mentioned earlier, include oil refinery industries. So in 2015, Oliger and another set of scientists conducted the BTEX field study, where they used a mobile laboratory to analyze the benzene emissions in Galena Park, Harrisburg, and Manchester. And they found that pipeline leaks emissions actually exceeded point source emissions. And these pipeline leaks emissions are not even being regulated or are not even being taken into consideration or not even being measured because they are leaks. They're not really the actual emissions of these facilities. And they found that benzene emissions were up to 37 parts per billion, and this is way higher than the minimal risk level, which is 9 parts per billion. And all of the red dots in this map shows all of the places that the benzene emissions exceeded 9 parts per billion. And just so you know, this is Galena Park, which is a residential area, just like Cyprus. Okay, so during the BTEX field study, there was another set of scientists that looked at they compared benzene emissions with the lifetime cancer risk levels. And they found that, well, the lifetime cancer risk for benzene is between 0.4 and 1.4. And they found that in Manchester, it was around 0.37. In Harrisburg, it was around 0.33. And in Galena Park was around 0.78. So Galena Park is the only place that exceeded the risk levels. However, both of the other ones are not exceeding it, but they're fairly close to the risk levels shown by this graph chart. Okay. So now, looking at the social aspect of it. According to the Texas organization, one of the places with the highest national emissions of benzene is Manchester, Houston, which is 45 minutes away from where we are right now. Well, children who live in this area and who are exposed to these emissions have a 56% higher risk of developing leukemia compared to other children in the country and in the world. Well, no, just in the country, sorry. And they also found that 98% of the population in these areas, Galena Park, Harrisburg, and Manchester, are considered to be part of a minority group. And out of that minority group, 89% of them are Latino descent or Hispanic descent. And also, the average household income for this area is around $34,000, which is way lower than the average American household income, which is around $53,000 right now, $53,000. Okay, this is just a map that explains the income level in this city, and the blue areas are the highest income levels, and then the red ones are the lowest income areas. And this is just the area that I've been talking about throughout this whole presentation, so you can look at it from a graphic, visual perspective. Okay, so some of the discussion points that I would like to mention is that oil refinery facilities are located in low-income and race minority areas, and not necessarily because they were set there while they were there, but they're just there, and the low level of regulations are affecting the people. Then the other discussion point is that benzene emissions in Houston come mostly from pipeline leaks emission, and this for me is one of the most important points because it means that the benzene levels, the benzene emissions are not even being taken into consideration the whole scope. So even if they're not even taking into consideration the pipeline leaks emissions. And considering that, I would advocate for zero tolerance regulations. But considering the political aspect of our city and just in general how the state works, it is very highly difficult that this might happen. And finally, minority groups are the ones who are being exposed and have higher risk of developing diseases that are related to the exposure of benzene. So once again, my research question, what are the health consequences related to the benzene emissions in the Houston Ship Channel due to environmental injustice? And my major takeaway is that benzene emissions, even the tiniest exposure to benzene, can lead to development of neurological symptoms, blood disorders, chromosomal and immune system complications, chronological diseases, developing leukemia, or main organ malfunctions. And the other major point is that minority groups in Houston are the ones who are suffering the effects of air pollution the most in the city. So I know that this is a lot of information to process and that we don't have a lot of power, but I would advocate that we do have a lot of power as voters and as citizens of not just this world, and not just this nation, but this world in general. We can support organizations such as Texas or Texas Campaign for the Environment, who work hard to make this to mitigate this problem. Thank you.